Marea Britanie a fost un fel de teren test pentru experimentele cu știri și informații false care au cauzat diviziuni de opinie în rândul populației. În 2016, când britanicii aveau de ales dacă mai rămân sau nu în Uniunea Europeană, s-au multiplicat mesajele transmise de conturi false. Acestea, de altfel, au și dispărut din mediul online în momentul în care răul a fost deja comis. Giles Portman este noul ambasador al Marii Britanii la București și are deja multă experiență împotriva dezinformării. Îl cunoaștem imediat. Sunt Cristina Cileacu, începe Pașaport Diplomatic. Giles Portman, British Ambassador to Bucharest, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, the buzzword for this year is elections, and if we look at elections, by default we have to look as well to the disinformation and misinformation in this century especially. UK is out of European Union mostly because of lies spread on social media, and not only on social media. Do you think that Europeans, looking at what happened with the United Kingdom, learned their lessons?
The UK chose to leave the European Union because we had a referendum, and the majority of the population decided that they would like to leave, and that's what the government did. It honoured the decision of the British people.
Yes, but the British people for sure were influenced by some misinformation.
Well, I think that disinformation is definitely a challenge, and you mentioned this year of elections. I think that there are two big challenges actually this year for all countries having elections. The first is the continuing risk of disinformation, and the second is the risk of cyber attacks on our democratic processes. And I think that's something that Romania and the UK should be talking about, and we are talking about together, to make sure that our resilience, both in terms of organisations, also the media and also individual citizens, is as strong as possible.
Do the British people, now that they are no longer in the European Union, can say about themselves that they are more immune to disinformation?
Well, I wouldn't say it's particularly linked to being in or out of the European Union, because this
I'm talking about this experience they had.
I think that what we've been able to do over many years is catalogue the threat of disinformation, and I focus in particular on hostile external disinformation, so actors that are deliberately trying to have a malign influence on our democracies and on our freedoms. And I think we've become very aware of that in the UK over the last years, but also across Europe. And the database of evidence of external hostile disinformation is much stronger than it ever has been. And as I say, it's incumbent on governments and media and individual citizens to question more and to not be complacent about this risk, because it certainly continues.
Usually an information that is fake and is proven to be fake is debunked. It has the tendency of reappear after a while. It stays on the internet, perhaps if it's erased from the main search engines. Can we do something about that? Because it's kind of difficult to regulate the social media, and on the other hand, if it's on the internet, it will stay on the internet.
Yeah, there are ways to be clever about that. For example, instead of reposting disinformation and saying this is disinformation, just a screenshot of it, for example, so that it doesn't gather more and more clicks and views. I mean, there is a discussion about whether debunking works or not. I've always been of the view that debunking does work, because if you don't say something is false or a lie when it is, you leave a vacuum for people to claim it's true. So I think we should debunk, but we should do it in a clever way. And that means not only reacting to every single piece of disinformation, but also stepping back and analysing and seeing patterns. And what we've seen in terms of pro-Kremlin disinformation, for example, is that the same patterns and the same techniques appear again, over and over again, whether it's related to Syria, or whether it's related to Ukraine, or the downing of MH17, or the poisoning of the Skripal. So what we can see then is patterns to disinformation which help us prove it's disinformation.
And do you think we are able to counterattack this? What is the best way? Debunking is one, you said it, but then again is wasting a lot of time on debunking. I mean, you cannot debunk literally everything. So what else shall we do?
There are probably three things we should be doing. First of all, governments and non-governmental organizations need to track this information. They need to record it and analyze it and share information about it so that our general experience and knowledge increases. Secondly, I think there's an important role for the media in terms of independent, literate journalists who are able to analyze information and call out disinformation. And thirdly, I think we need to be confident enough to present our own narrative, so our own positive strategic communications, addressing some of the issues that disinformation focuses on, and pushing back confidently and strategically with our own information narrative.
And how can we reach the public that is mostly on social media? Because usually when we talk about disinformation and misinformation, we do it on classical media, like the one we are now on. Is not enough.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in terms of pro-Kremlin disinformation that it appears in many forms, often in television, often in newspapers and social media, but also things like email exchanges, email threads which try to reach people who perhaps aren't on social media. I think social media is the most challenging because this is where people's algorithms tend to give them more of what they like, and it's very, very risky because you can be drawn into an echo chamber where you simply see more and more of what you've already clicked. So I think it's really important that people understand that they need to take responsibility for their own media consumption, and that means not just taking your information from a single source, but from a variety of sources.
Democracies work a lot with liberties, and of course one liberty is the liberty of speech, and it's a core value of democracies. On the other hand, we have the extremists that are taking advantage of this liberty and use it in order to spread lies for the public opinions and in public spaces. Are we still talking about liberties if extremists do that, or anyone does something like that?
I think it's a real challenge of disinformation that what has happened is that some of our very strengths as a democracy, in other words, the freedom to express your opinion, the willingness to listen to other sides of the story, can be turned against us in the pursuit of what we would call balance. So if you have one point of view which is correct and one point of view which is extremely incorrect, there's a tendency, I think, which has been exploited to go for the middle option as the truth, which of course is not correct. And I'm seeing a bit of a change, certainly in British media, who still present both sides of a story, but are more willing to say this side of the story has no substance or has been disproven many times. So I think we have to be a bit careful about making sure that our own principle of balance and openness isn't exploited and turned against us.
In this year in particular, we're talking about 10 years since the Russian illegally annexed Crimea and 2 years since they started the war in Ukraine. We see warnings for the first time in our peaceful Europe from top militaries, and top militaries from United Kingdom were among the first ones, warning the people to be prepared for a bigger war. In Romania, the message was understood like, oh, isn't NATO strong enough? They rely on us, the people, us citizens. Do you think that is a correct way to see the messages like that, or what is this warning about?
What we're facing in terms of Russia's illegal and premeditated and unjustified invasion of Ukraine is probably the biggest threat to European security of this generation, so it has to be taken extremely seriously. At the same time, if you look at the combined strength of NATO versus the strength of Russia, we are much stronger united as an alliance. So the first thing is that we have to remain very united as NATO allies, and we have to look for new partners. So I think the response in terms of defence and security has been very clear. Sweden and Finland have chosen to join NATO. We've drawn the conclusion that Ukraine's rightful place in due course should be in the NATO alliance. And Western countries across Europe are increasing their defence budgets. Romania's doing a great job in terms of increasing its budget to 2.5% of GDP. The UK is beyond 2 and looking at a target of 3. So we have to respond to this threat to European security with an increase in our defence budgets and our preparedness to work together as allies in NATO, and that's exactly what's happened.
And this warning, how shall the citizens see this warning?
Well, as I say, the response needs to be firm, because we've learnt in Europe before that if we don't respond firmly to this kind of aggression, dictators and aggressors will come back for more. So the first thing we have to do is send a very clear message that our democracies will stand up to and triumph over authoritarianism and extremism. But I would say also that our economies, although of course they're facing challenges, are stronger again, united against Russia. So if we look at the 30-odd countries supporting Ukraine against Russia, our economies are about 30 times bigger than the Russian economy. We've imposed the strongest ever package of sanctions against a major economy in the world. Putin has himself admitted that it's causing colossal problems for Russia. So that economic strength is also an important factor.
But do you think that people can balance this type of message as well? Because they have the extreme parties all over Europe saying that we are supposed not to back up Ukraine anymore, and we have these messages, as I said, from top military, from all the allies, at least in Europe, but not only in Europe, saying we should get ready for war. People are disoriented somehow. I mean, they will tend to choose the message that said if we do not support Ukraine anymore, maybe the war will be over and we should get on with our lives.
Well, I'm afraid there's no evidence that if we stopped supporting Ukraine, the threat would go away. Absolutely the opposite. I mean, Putin spoke recently about there being no limits to Russia's borders, about viewing Odessa as a Russian city. It seems very clear to me that the only way that Putin is going to stop being a threat to Europe is by realizing that he can't succeed in Ukraine. So that's why it's really important that all allies continue to support Ukraine. And I think the quickest route to peace in Ukraine, but also stability in Europe, is for Putin to conclude that he can't win and to withdraw from the territory he's occupied.
United Kingdom historically saw Russia in a different way than the rest of Western European countries. The view is much more closer to the Eastern European countries. How do you see Russia right now?
Well, at the end of the Cold War, we reached out in many ways to try and forge a better relationship with Russia, expanding the G7 to the G8, developing a very privileged relationship between NATO and Russia, for example. So there were really encouraging years. Unfortunately, that's not the situation that we're in now. And Russia has not only illegally invaded Ukraine, but has repeatedly threatened other European countries, including with the use of nuclear weapons. So I'm afraid we're in a very different situation than we were, say, 10, 15 years ago, and the response needs to be very firm.
We also have to get ready for a possibility of having NATO without United States. We are looking at the US elections as well, and one of the candidates has this idea as well, at least in his campaign. Are we ready for that? Can NATO still survive without United States?
Well, I'd say a couple of things about the United States. The first of all is that whoever wins the election there, I'm sure that the UK and the US will continue to have a very strong relationship. And the second thing I would say is that what we've seen over the last couple of years is very strong cross-party support for Ukraine in the United States, including in the Congress, because I believe that Americans and Europeans look at that conflict through the same principles of defending sovereignty and democracy and freedom. At the same time, I think that European countries have to do more, and that's why I refer to Romania and the UK both increasing our defence budgets, but also the UK taking responsibility for standing by Ukraine for as long as it takes. So when my Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was back visiting Ukraine again last month, he confirmed another £2.5 billion of British support to Ukraine. That takes the overall support to about £12 billion. And also he confirmed that the UK would be the first country, and was the first country, to sign a bilateral security agreement, giving Ukraine some of the security guarantees it requires on the road to eventual NATO membership. So, as Rishi Sunak said, we're with Ukraine today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes. And I think we'll soon see other European partners also coming up with bilateral security agreements, and we have to take responsibility for peace and security on our own continent.
You are a new ambassador in Romania, and in order to present yourself, you organized a press conference where you stated your key topics for your missions, and these are more defense, more investments, British investments in Romania, and the other way around, of course, and fighting the organized crime. When it comes to defense, what do you intend?
Well, I think bilaterally we have a very strong defence relationship, and actually over the last few years the amount of training and exercising that has taken place between the UK and Romania has grown a lot, and that is definitely going to continue. I think that the Black Sea has emerged as a really important theatre of interest, and of course Romania as a littoral state has real experience and interest in the Black Sea, and I think we can work together more in the Black Sea. That's, for example, your demining coalition with Bulgaria and Turkey is something really to be welcomed, and something that we may consider participating in. And of course our support for Ukraine, both in terms of military aid but also protecting the supply of grain away from Ukraine to countries that need it, is also a really important area of focus as well.
This idea that was recently leaked to the public, saying that perhaps the Russians will have a plan to attack the Baltic states in the next 10 years, more or less, will turn again the attention from the Black Sea towards the Baltic Sea, or NATO finally understood that all the eastern flank is important?
Oh, I think NATO has absolutely understood that all the eastern flank is important. So, of course, the Baltic Sea and the Baltic states are close to home for the UK and vitally important to our own defence and security, which is why we have close partnerships, for example, through the Joint Expeditionary Force. But the Baltic Sea is now becoming a NATO sea with the enlargement of NATO. The Black Sea is an area of huge potential in terms of trade and commerce and energy security, but also threatened by Russia's occupation of Crimea and parts of Ukraine. So I'm absolutely clear that Romania is our key ally in terms of protecting the southeast flank of NATO, and we need to make sure that we are absolutely focused on the entire eastern flank.
As a British ambassador in Romania, first you have to stop to Iași in order to learn our language. This is the rule back home. What was most difficult for you to learn?
Well, I was really interested in learning Romanian because I studied Latin at university, and I was really interested in this country that had a language closely connected to Latin, and I've studied Spanish and French and Russian and Turkish and Czech, so I thought all together it would be fine. It's actually, the vocabulary is quite easy for me because most of the words are related to one of those languages. The hardest thing about Romanian is some of the things that you learn right at the beginning, like the present tense or definite and indefinite articles, are some of the hardest things in Romanian, I think. So actually, the first few weeks are a bit of a shock. It's harder than you expect. I've got over that initial shock, but I still have a long way to go, I think.
And do you have some words you cannot still pronounce yet?
I'm absolutely sure there are many words I can't pronounce, and in my last lesson it wasn't so much pronunciation as emphasis, how it's quite hard from an English-speaking point of view to predict on what syllable the emphasis of a word can be, and there don't seem to be many rules about that. So you just have to listen and learn, I think.
And do you have a message in Romanian languages to see how good you are in Romanian?
Da, mesajul meu este că încă învăț, cu siguranță, dar am ajuns aici de-abia acum câteva luni și am observat deja că avem un parteneriat foarte strâns, ca relația bilaterală între Marea Britanie și România este foarte bună, foarte caldă și strânsă. Cred că suntem două țări care gândesc la fel, cred că ne sprijinim, ne ajutăm reciproc. Cum ați spus, luptăm împreună împotriva amenințării Rusiei ca aliați NATO, lucrăm pentru a distruge crima organizată și cot la cot muncim pentru a crește prosperitatea pentru toți. Așa că în ceea ce privește mandatul meu, în cei 4-5 ani când sunt aici, vreau ca această relație să devină mai strânsă și mai caldă și mai pozitivă și sunt sigur că o să reușesc.
Vă urăm succes, mulțumim mult pentru acest interviu.
Mulțumesc!
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe, vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și reluare sâmbătă după miezul nopții. La revedere!